When I gave this speech last year, one of the students, who's very autistic, notice how handsome he made me look, wrote the following, and it says, if you think that public roads are a good idea, I have a bridge to sell you. Maybe you can make it work. When my book came out on road privatization, anyone got a copy of that with them? Wave it around. No, the book. No one brought, I forgot to bring the book, but there is a book based on this sort, or rather the lecture is based on the book. That was a pretty good cartoon. This one makes me look even more handsome. What was the joke? I didn't catch it. I guess it wasn't a good one. I don't know. In any case, it says, why did the chicken cross the road? And the answer is, I have no idea, but we must privatize the road. And other people said, I have no idea, but I'm going to write a 60-page paper refuting the chicken point by point. These people are vicious. And then here's another one. Why did the chicken cross the road? I have no idea, but I'm going to co-author a paper with the chicken on that issue. People make fun of me. I get no respect. What is the general case for privatization? Privatization of anything? Well, there are two, the way I see it. One is a utilitarian case. Mises tells us in his book Socialism that there's no rational planning. If we don't have prices for the factors of production, we have no way of telling whether we should make the bridge out of platinum or steel or what. We have no way of deciding whether a rowboat should be made out of wood, plastic, metal, what have you. The only reason that the Soviet system lasted for as long as it did is that they did have access to some sort of prices for factors of production. Namely, they'd sneak over here, spies, and they'd buy up the newspaper or they'd buy the Sears Roebuck catalog and they'd get some idea. But if the whole world were socialistic, we'd be planning with no rational possibility at all. One of the problems is the direction that they give the factories. If they say maximize the number, say a nail factory, well, the way to maximize the output by weight is to have gigantic nails that no one can use. So that's what the factory owners did. They just had gigantic nails and no one could use them. And then the central planners caught on to this and they said, oh, no, we have to maximize the number of nails. So they made these little teeny tiny nails that no one could use again. And yet they were following rational planning. It's just that if you don't have consumers in there that want to use nails for, to build a building, well, then you're not going to get what you want. There was this wonderful movie, Moscow on the Hudson, where they would tell, if you saw a line in the Soviet Union, you just got on the line. You didn't care what it was because, you'll probably need it. And, they'd have lots of left shoes and no right shoes. And, it was just a big mess. And that's the Soviet system. Hazlitt tells us that the case for privatization of anything is the profit and loss system, the weeding out system. In my neighborhood, there was this store that keeps going through different iterations. It goes broke as a restaurant, then they start a bookstore, then they try pharmacy. Why do they keep changing what this store should be? Because they want to fine-tune it compared to what the consumers want. Because the old one goes broke or it's not making as much money as they think it could, so they switch. What entrepreneurs are trying to do is make what they offer congruent with what we, the consumers, want. So this is a magnificent utilitarian case for privatization. Imagine if the post office were in charge of the web. I mean, it just boggles the imagination. And yet that would be the case for non-privatization. What's the deontological or ethical, moral case for privatization? Well, when things are private, everything is voluntary. You buy or you sell or you rent or you invest, and it's always on a voluntary basis. No one is coerced into anything. Whereas when it's in the public sector, so-called, the government, it's predicated on violence. It's predicated on the initiation of violence. And the initiation of violence is grotesque. It's barbaric. It's just not civilized. If you want to have a civilized order, you have to privatize things. And my view is that if it moves, privatize it. And if it doesn't move, privatize it. And since everything either moves or doesn't move, you privatize everything. Okay, so that's the general case for privatization. I'm now going to apply it to roads, highways, streets, avenues, thoroughfares, and a little bit in oceans, lakes, and rivers toward the end. Why so radical? Why apply privatization to these weird things that most people, if you see them out in the street, they're going to say, you know, what kind of controlled substances are you using to come up with that? Well, the case has already been made for factories and stores and post offices and things like that. It's sort of like shooting fish in a barrel. Although in my subsequent, I'm coming up with a new issue of Defending the Undefendable, and one of the chapters is shooting fish in a barrel. So I shouldn't. This is the idea where you go out hunting in these private farms, and you know some people want to have the rhinoceros right there, you know, sort of pose so you can shoot him. And if that's what the market wants, you know, that's okay. But in terms of, you know, reaching, you don't want to apply it to the post office or grocery stores or something. You want to apply it to something that's a little controversial. And if you apply free enterprise principles to the hard cases, it's a better proof in general. I mean, otherwise you can be accused of ducking out on the hard cases. Yes, the free enterprise system works for pens and wristwatches, but you know, for the important things, you really can't have free enterprise. So you want to make that case. Also, we should take the offense. We shouldn't always be on the defense. Now, in international relations, that's different. I'm Ron Paulian here. I'm in favor of defense, not offense. But in terms of argumentation, I think what we ought to do is not have them come to us and say, well, you know, the free market can't work, but rather go to them and apply free enterprise to places where it's not even on the radar. For example, roads. Then I have a sort of a soft spot in my heart for mad mothers against drunken driving. These are mothers who've lost family members, children, husbands, what have you, and I think I dedicate this book to them. Not that they're very appreciative. I've written to them. They don't write back, but what the heck. Okay. My idea is that if we had private roads, then they could have their own road and they could run it the way they wanted as sort of a demonstration. Like Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy can get areas of the environment and run it the way they want, but Mothers Against Drunk Driving can't get that unless we can have privatized roads. And my idea is that they should have a few roads, and let's see what they do. Maybe they can improve matters. Okay. What about people who don't agree with private roads? Is it too harsh to call them road socialists? Well, you know, at the outset, it seems harsh. I was once in an informal debate with Milton Friedman, and he was giving me this usual crap about, you know, we have to have government roads, and I called him a road socialist. And he didn't like it. I'm not sure why. If it what is it? Quacks like a duck, walks like a duck. If it quacks like a road socialist, walks like a road socialist, talks like a road socialist, maybe it is a road socialist. Now, there are a lot of people that say, well, you just can't have that. Government and roads are like horse and carriage, love and marriage, or something like that. The governments have always run roads. Not true. Not true. I'm not a historian, and I bow to my colleagues who are historians. Tom Woods could correct me on this, but I think I'm right. According to my research, the first roads were turnpike roads in New England in the 18th century, and some company would set up a little road from A to B, and they would have places where you'd pay for it. And the pay was based on the number of axles of the wagon, the number of horses, even the width of the wheel. If the wheel was very narrow, think ice skates, it would put ruts in the road and they would charge more for a very thin wheel. And if the wheel was wide, think steamroller, they would charge less because now the wagon is going to flatten out the surfaces in the road. So this was a going concern. There were private roads in the horse and buggy era, and if you just had a horse, you'd pay less than a horse in a wagon. It was a going concern. The problem was that the government, which set itself up as the monopoly, would not protect the toll gate people who try to collect tolls, and then, the users would try to skirt around them or not pay. And when the road owners try to say, well, you're the police, or, you're supposed to defend us, they wouldn't do it, so it became unviable. But it's not unviable because it's anything intrinsic to roads that they can't be privately owned. It's rather because if the government sets itself up as the protector of law and order and then doesn't protect law and order in certain areas, well, then these areas can't be private. Now, the economists will say that roads are a public good, and I spent a whole hour on public goods, so I won't go into this too deeply, but public goodness is excludability and rivalrousness, and they say you can't exclude people from the roads, but you can exclude them if the police will exclude non-payers, and it is non-rivalrous as long as there's not a full capacity on the road. As long as there's less than full capacity, there's nothing that's rivalrous. So I think this economic sophisticated argument fails. Okay. Why is it that economists have not taken this up? Well, there are more jobs for economists under road socialism than there would be under private roads. We have the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which employs economists up the wazoo who are running regressions on this and that and the other and having a grand old time. This wouldn't exist, or probably wouldn't exist, if we had private roads. So economists know which side of the bread their butter is on, or what side of the butter their bread is on. I'm not sure about that. Namely, they have a self-interest in socialism. Economists have a self-interest in socialism, not just in this area, but in many, many other areas where they're hired on as experts who can run regressions, what have you. Now, many people will think it's unspeakable to have private roads, and in one of my writings I wrote the following, quote, "Why it's impossible, you just can't do it. There would be millions of people killed in traffic accidents. Traffic jams, the likes of which you had never seen, would be an everyday occurrence. Motorists would have to stop every 25 feet and put 1/100th of a penny in each little old lady's toll box. Without eminent domain, there would be all sorts of obstructionists setting up roadblocks in the oddest places. Chaos, anarchy would reign. Traffic would grind to a screeching halt as the entire fabric of the economy fell about our ears." That's roughly the way a lot of people would, you say private roads, and I said, what are you, nuts? You just can't have private roads. Well, the main reason, my main motivation for writing about this is to illustrate that the market can work better than the government, to promote libertarianism. My second most important reason is a utilitarian reason. It's about safety. Do you know how many people die on the roads every year? It's about 40,000, and this has been pretty steady for the last 30, 40 years. Now, they make a great play of the fact that the number of deaths per mile used has been falling, and that's true. But still, the number of people that are dying every year on our nation's roads is about 40,000. To put this in context, only 50,000 U.S. soldiers died in the Vietnam War of 8 years' duration. 9/11, only a stinking lousy 3,000 people died. 3 measly thousand, and we're all upset about 9/11. Katrina, only 1,500 people were slaughtered by the government. I don't see why we should be exercised about that. Waco, they only killed 86 people. Tim McVeigh, only 168 people that he slaughtered, innocent people, but here's 40,000 people. I mean, 40,000 people could fill half that football stadium. The Auburn football stadium, which holds around 80, 90,000. I mean, that's a lot of people. Well, why isn't this in the news? I mean, why are they still bitching and moaning about 9/11? 40,000 people a year, that's grotesque. Every time a little girl gets lost in the woods, they'll send out 500 people to look for her. One stinking, lousy human life. And yet here, 40,000 people bite the dust on the roads and nobody says squat. The third motivation is traffic congestion. I've lived in New York City for a while, even New Orleans. Even small towns have got traffic jams. You ought to see the traffic jams around here when there's a football game. Boy, that's... and this is a small town. But the powers that be say that the reason for deaths is not because of government ownership, it's rather because of speed, alcohol, and bad weather conditions. Or, there's this guy Sam Peltzman, who is a University of Chicago socialist economist, and says that the reason... That was a joke, but what the heck. It's, I'm all that's holding you between now and lunch, so I can understand. Anyway, Sam Peltzman, who's done good work on the FDA and done other good work, what he says is that the reasons for deaths are the following. Quote, vehicle speed, alcohol consumption, the number of young drivers, changes in drivers' incomes, the money costs of accidents, the average age of cars, the ratio of new cars to all cars, because it has been suggested that while drivers familiarize themselves with their new cars, accident risk may increase. Traffic density, expenditures on traffic law enforcement by state highway patrols, expenditures on roads, the ratio of imports to total cars, because there was evidence that small cars, imported cars, well, this is a little dated, are more lethal than large cars if an accident occurs, education of the population, the availability of hospital care, which might reduce deaths if injury occurs. The National Highway Safety Traffic Administration gives 108 different causes of fatalities. So what they're saying is, it's got nothing to do with government ownership. It's all these things, the 25 things that Peltzman mentions, the 108 things of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. This is all wrong. What they're doing is confusing proximate and ultimate causes. Look, suppose I take a rifle and I shoot right out that window and I hit a passerby. And you all capture me because I'm a murderer. And I say, tut-tut, wasn't me, it was the bullet. I mean, is anyone going to give credence to that? And yet, in a sense, it really was the bullet. I'm here 200 yards away from the guy. I didn't do it. It was the bullet. The bullet was the proximate cause. I was merely the ultimate cause. Well, the ultimate cause is important. Take a different case. Mama Goldberg's next door, the deli, goes broke. And we're now management consultants. We're brought in to figure out why it is that Mama Goldberg's went broke. And we say, well, the waitresses were surly, the cooks were inept, they didn't have a clean place, nobody had a broom. Would we accept this? No. What we would say is that these are the proximate causes of why it went broke. But the ultimate cause is management. The management didn't hire a better waitress. The management didn't hire a better cook. The management didn't hire someone with a broom. Right? Do you see the point I'm making? So what I'm trying to say is that the ultimate cause of highway fatalities is government management. It's only these proximate causes that people like Sam Peltzman and the highway authorities are talking about. So the cause of the deaths is the management. And who is the management of the roads? The government. So it's the government's fault, just as it's my fault for killing that guy, just as it's the fault of the management of the restaurant or the hotel or whichever industry or whichever firm goes broke. It's not these proximate causes, it's rather the ultimate cause, namely, you have to look one step beneath the proximate cause to see what's causing the proximate causes, and that's the ultimate cause, and that's the manager, and that's the government. Now, at this point, what I usually do when I'm in a hostile audience, namely a non-libertarian audience, is they're getting restive. They're ready to throw stuff at me, and they're ready to boo and hiss, or they're already doing it. So I pull out my John Stuart Mill on liberty, that you have to give each side, you have to listen, you have to know the enemy so that you can better refute, all that sort of stuff. But I'll skip this because I think you're not getting ready to lynch me for having the audacity to say that we should privatize things. Okay, so I'm about ready to explain how private roads and highways would work. So I'm going to skip through a whole bunch of things. What I do with these hostile audiences, I say, well, it's too new, people are unaccustomed to it, so I try to get them accustomed to it, and I say private roads. So I'm trying to get them acclimated to it, but I don't have to go through that whole page of my notes. I'll just skip ahead. How would it work? Like any other business, for profit. There might be loss leaders. It'd be profit and loss. You want to build a new road? Well, you go assemble some land, you attract investors, you hire a labor force, you build it, you charge for it, set up the rules of the road, you keep the potholes filled, you put road signs, you have traffic lights maybe, you hire cops to make sure that people abide by the rules. That's it. And if you don't do a good job, you're going to go bankrupt, and some other road company will possibly take over and will have better management. In other words, it'll be put on the same footing as wristwatches and shirts and podiums and other things, which create no problems whatsoever because of the magic of the marketplace. So all I'm trying to do is to apply the Hazlitt, Rothbard, Mises insights about why free enterprise works, and apply it to an area that people are unaccustomed to it. What kind of safety devices might be used by private enterprise road corporations that are not now used? Well, I started writing about this in the 70s, in the mid-70s. So in my book, it's sort of a little dated because the government has 30, 40, 50 years later come up with some of these things that I mentioned then. But first, let me say it's impossible to anticipate how a fully free market would work in an area where it hasn't worked. If we had socialized shoes, government had always provided shoes, and some maniac said, well, we should privatize the shoe market, people would start saying, well, how about the proportion of shoes and sneakers? How about swimming pool thongs? Who would create them? And how about the shoelaces? And, what about high-heeled shoes? Would there be high-heeled shoes for ladies? And there'd be all these problems. Or, where would the shoe stores be located? And the proper answer is, we don't know. This would be an entrepreneurial decision kind of a thing. Well, it's similar with roads. You don't know exactly, because I'm not a road entrepreneur. I'm a mere economist trying to apply the Mises, Hayek, Rothbard insights. But I'm not an expert in roads. I've never never managed a road. So I can only speculate about these things. Well, some of the speculations have come true. For example, one of the things I suggested is you get a cross or a Jewish star or a Muslim, whatever it is, whenever there's a fatality, and you put it on the road. And some roads do have it, but the crosses are this high, you can hardly see them. What I had in mind was, 20 foot high. Or take, you know what an accordionized car is? Think accordion. The car gets smushed. Instead of, being, 20 feet long, it's 5 feet long. Put that up on a podium or on a pole where everyone can see it. And maybe that'll make people be more careful. I don't know. It might work. It might not work. All I can say is that some road owners should try it, others shouldn't. And if it works, these guys will make more profits and the thing will spread. And if it doesn't work, then they'll have to stop that. Again, the same sort of principles. So we have accordionized cars, cemetery markers. I favored the cat's eyes. The cat's eyes. At night, you can see these little things on the road that sparkle, so you can see where the lanes are. On the other hand, there is research that says that this is very bad to do, because when you make it safer by putting a yellow line here and a white line there and cat's eyes all over the place, people go faster. What you really ought to do is have a sword of Damocles in front of every car driver. A sword, so if he bumps anyone, he gets killed. You get that? In other words, there's research on this, and again, I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know whether it's like what they're doing in some places. Is they have no stop signs, no traffic lights, and then everyone goes slower. Now, I don't know which is the best way to go. All I know is that some firms should do this, some firms should do that, and then we'll see. But if you have a monopolist government ownership, you get very little of this sort of experimentation. The way they run this thing is let's say there are 3 lanes. In the left lane, you can do, well, what the rule is the minimum speed is 40 miles an hour and the maximum speed is 70 miles an hour on most 3-lane highways. Now, I used to drive a little Honda 90cc bike, and it was capable of 40 miles an hour with a tailwind. And downhill, I could even do 45. But if it was uphill and I had a passenger and the wind was against me, I could do 35. And I got on the road. I didn't care. The highway was a lot more convenient. So, and then you get these little old ladies. I don't know why I'm all fond of little old ladies, but they go very slowly and they go in the left lane, right? And I tell you, for normal traffic, if you're doing 70 miles an hour in a clear day like today, the cars will go right by you. They're doing 80, 85. So the variance in speed goes all the way from 85 to down to 40. Maybe the problem is the variation in speed, not the speed. I don't know. It's possible. Maybe what they should do is have different speed limits for different lanes. In the right-hand lane, everyone should do 55. In the middle one, 70. Maybe in the left lane, 85. I don't know. But it's possible that if they pursued a policy like that, we'd have fewer fatalities. But no, all we get is, a one-size-fits-all from Washington, D.C., and, they had that double nickel, 55 miles an hour. Now, east of the Mississippi, 55 miles an hour isn't so bad, but you get out into Utah or Wyoming or Colorado, and, you do 55 miles an hour, you're just sitting still. I mean, I remember in Nevada and Montana, when I was out there, they would have this speed limit, go any speed you feel safe. And I was doing 110, it was fine. And cars were passing me, although there were very few cars. And then you slow down to 90 and you start saying, well, I'm not getting anywhere. So it's all relative, and yet if you have a one-size-fits-all for everything, as articulated by Washington, D.C., well, that's a recipe for failure. Okay, now, I've been criticized by this guy, Larry White, who is a free enterpriser. He's a professor at George Mason now. I think he was just in Missouri. A friend of mine, actually. And what he says is it's illicit to attribute to the government 40,000 deaths. Because if we had private enterprise, we wouldn't have 0 deaths, right? I mean, perfection is denied us. We're on the wrong side of the Garden of Eden for that. There would be some deaths. I'm not saying there'd be 0 deaths if we had privatization. So what he says is that, let's suppose there would be 10,000 deaths. So we should only attribute to the government 30,000 deaths, namely the additional deaths over and above private enterprise deaths of 10,000. You get where I'm coming from? Well, I think this is nonsense. Look, Hitler killed 6 million Jews. Let's stipulate that that number is exactly true. It might be a little different, but let's stipulate that that's true. He did it over 4 years. Let's also stipulate that in that time, 100,000 people would have died of natural causes. So is Hitler responsible for 6 million deaths or 5.9 deaths? 6 million, damn it! I mean, he killed 6 million people. I don't care that they would have died anyway, possibly, and quite likely, he killed old people who might have died. So I don't care that the roads, private roads, might have killed only 10,000 people, and therefore we should attribute only 30. No, you attribute 40,000. Those bastards are killing 40,000 people a year, and they're responsible for all of them. What's most important about this business of saving lives is that I emphasize there are ways that we can't anticipate because we're not road managers, we're not road entrepreneurs. If these road entrepreneurs were competing with each other as to how many fewer deaths could occur on their road, we'd have much better records, safety records. See, right now, if you have a crack up on the, the 85 that runs by here, the I-85, who loses money? Is it the governor of Alabama? No. Is it the mayor of the city? No. It's nobody. The only people that lose money are the people that are in the traffic jam. But if I-85 was owned by the I-85 company, and the I-70 company, which runs parallel to it, could say, well, look at what happened over there last night, whereas we're pretty good. Everyone come to us, even though we're going to charge a little more. Well, now we have the benefits of competition mobilized, focused on saving people's lives in a way that we can't anticipate. Okay, what I'm going to do now is consider a series of objections to what I've said. So what I've said, to reiterate, there's a general case for privatization. It's moral, it's utilitarian, it applies to everything, including roads. And the way the roads would run would be like any other business. Some people think, well, long, thin things can't be privatized. Well, we do have long, thin things called railroads that were private. So that ought to get your mind unraveled about, just something intrinsically unnatural about a long, thin thing like a road being privatized. Well, we do have an example. And we have examples, as I've said, in the historical period in the U.S. in the 18th century. My research goes all the way back to England in the 9th century where they had private roads. Very few of them. There was the King's Highway, but there were private roads historically. Okay, the first objection is that if we had a private road, you have to halt every few feet and toss a coin in a toll box, and this would just make traffic crazy. Well, there is this thing called a universal product code, and I've got one right here in case you people haven't seen these. When I started doing my research on this in the 70s, I was doing research on grocery journals and pharmaceutical journals. And people were saying, well, what are you doing? What's with you and groceries? And the reason I was into groceries is because the grocery stores were first putting in these universal product codes in the 60s or the 70s when I was doing this research initially. And my idea is you put a universal product code thing on every car, and now the car travels over the road, and at the end of the month you get a bill from the relevant road owners. So you don't have to stop and put a 1/10 of a penny or 1/1,000,000th of a penny into every little old lady's house that you go on Elm Street. So this is a non-starter. Okay, the next objection. This is a convoluted one. This is a biggie. I had a big debate with Richard Epstein, another so-called free enterpriser who really should know better. And what it was he was saying, well, you can't have a road without eminent domain. And eminent domain, seizure of land in order to make a road, is incompatible with libertarianism. So here is a picture of the United States, Texas, Florida, in case you people are not clear on where we are. Isn't that a pretty picture? I don't like to brag, but when it comes to artistic endeavors, I'm the man. Okay, so you want to build a road from, I guess, you see, there's, what do you call it, Long Island there. Verisimilitude is my middle name. Okay, so you want to build a road from New York to L.A., and I don't know how many people own land between New York and L.A., but it must be in the tens of thousands, if not the hundreds of thousands. And there's going to be a holdout. Somebody's going to say, you can't build your road in my land, in my farmland, or you can, but I'm going to charge you $1 trillion per acre, which in effect means that they're a holdout. So how do we deal with the holdout problem? One way we deal with the holdout problem, there's the holdout. We want to go from A to B or from B to A, and this guy is the holdout. But we don't have to have a straight line road. We can have the great circle routes or whatever it is, or there are various ways to make a road from one place to another. And if we get a holdout on this one, well, we could build the road this way or that way or some other way. And another way getting around eminent domain problems is we don't have to go out and start offering anything to people. We could say to the people, we could tell everyone, hey, we're announcing this, we're going to make a road, and here are the 4 possible routes or the 5 possible routes, and you people get together and try to amalgamate, and the first one that does, we'll go that route. Or another possibility is you buy options, not land, but you buy options to buy land. For example, I want to buy some land over here, but I don't know that I'll need the land because maybe I'm going to build the road here. So what I say to the farmer is I say, look, you and I have now agreed that you'll sell me your land for $20,000 an acre, but I'm not sure that I want to buy it. So I'd like to buy an option to buy your land at $20,000 an acre, and I'll pay you $100. And if I exercise it within a year, then you are obligated, legally obligated, contractually obligated to sell me the land for $20,000 an acre. And if I don't exercise my option, well, you just keep the option money, which is a minimal amount of money. So I don't have to start paying vast amounts for land that I may or may not use. I can just buy options, which will be much, much cheaper. But suppose that somebody owns that land. That's what he owns. He owns that land. Now, the first question is this a legitimate way to homestead land? And here we have the donut or the bagel question. I got into this mainly because of my work in abortion and eviction and child killing. Are you allowed to put a child in the back of the room, in the back of your house, and not feed it? And are we allowed to come in and seize the child if you're not feeding it, if you're not homesteading it? And my answer is yes, you're forestalling. Here is a baby that other people want, and you're not being the guardian of it, so we, the people, can come in and seize that baby. But that's a little bit off the topic, so let me get back to this. The question is, are you allowed to homestead land in the bagel format? Namely, you homestead B, and you don't let anyone in A, and A is just a vast open area. And my claim is you're not allowed to do that because the ethos or the logic of homesteading is that you can only own stuff that you've mixed your labor with, and you've mixed your labor with B, but you haven't mixed your labor with A, and yet you're controlling A in the sense that you're preventing other people from getting through A because you're not allowing a pathway to A. You get the point I'm trying to make? It's sort of a complex point. What I'm trying to say is that legitimate homesteading means you can only control stuff that you legitimately own, and you can only legitimately own stuff you've homesteaded. And you've homesteaded B, and you're the legitimate owner of B, but you haven't homesteaded A, and yet you're exercising some sort of control over A. So I say that's illegitimate. And my buddy Stefan Kinsella says, well, how about this? You allowed a homestead in a sort of a 2/3 or a 3/4 bagel? Or to get back to the point that I started with, are you allowed a homestead in that format? And this is like 100 miles wide and 10 feet deep. So people have to go far around. And what I'm trying to say is that all these forms of homesteading are illegitimate. They're incompatible with the ethos of homesteading, which is to control just what you've controlled. Here, what you're controlling is not just B, but you're controlling A and C. You're making it very difficult. If this is 300 miles wide, you're in effect keeping people apart or keeping people from, like if this is unowned and here are the people, you're making it very difficult for people to homestead this, and yet, so in a sense you're controlling Area C, but you've never homesteaded Area C, so that's illegitimate. So, to get back to what I was saying before, this is an illegitimate ownership. Namely, it's 500 miles long or 300 miles long and, 20 feet wide. But just suppose that that's, namely what I want to do is make the worst case possible for me. I want to show we don't need eminent domain, or in Canada, what do they call it, expropriation. You don't need the government to seize land, even if you have this sort of a thing, because, wait for it, we need a drum roll here. What you can do is, if you get a holdout that owns this area, call it Area X, what you could do is build your road by making a tunnel under him or a bridge over him. You get it? In other words, if he's a holdout and he says, well, you just can't build a road, because look at the configuration. I own all this land, which is illegitimate in any case, according to libertarian theory, and I'm going to stop you building the road. And the only way you're going to build a road, he's a socialist, is by having government eminent domain. Not so, not so. I can dig under him or bridge over him. Now, it's going to cost a bit more to make a tunnel under his land or a bridge over his land, but at least it's not going to, at least I'll be able to do it. Whereas without that possibility, he can blockade me. He can prevent the road without eminent domain. Namely, he's going to say, you can't have private roads. This is sort of the Epstein argument. It's available on the web, a verbal debate, and also there was a thing in the NYU Law Review between me and Epstein. Okay, well, what's the counter-argument to that? The counter-argument to that is a thing called the Ad Cohen Doctrine. So what's the Ad Cohen Doctrine? What the Ad Cohen Doctrine is if I own a square mile on the surface of the earth, I own a narrowing cone down to the center of the earth, all the way, what is it, 8,000 miles? The radius of the earth is 16,000 miles, give or take? 17? What is it? Sorry? Well, I'm not interested in the circumference. I'm interested in the radius or the diameter. I think it's the radius is around 8,000. So I own 8,000 feet down in a narrowing cone, like think of an ice cream cone. And then I own up to my square mile on the surface. And I also own up into the heavens. This is the Milton Friedman argument against private roads, or one of the Milton Friedman arguments. He says, well, you know, how can you tunnel under? Because it's owned by this bad guy, X. X is the owner of the land, so you can't tunnel under, because if you tunnel under, you're tunneling into his land. And if you bridge over, you're bridging over into his air rights. And what I say is, nonsense on a stick. The Ad Cohen Doctrine is incompatible with libertarianism, because the Ad Cohen Doctrine says that you have a right to stuff 6,000 miles down that you never homesteaded and 6,000 miles up that you never homesteaded. For one thing, it would make air flight impossible, because every time an airplane goes over your farm, you say, hey, drop a few $100 or something. Well, you know, that's going to slow air travel down, and the point is, who homesteaded those air rights? The farmer 15,000 feet down? No, the air companies who were flying there, they're the ones who own the rights to keep flying there. This would also allow slant drilling. So if there are two plots, A and B, and let's say there's oil over here, what this guy can do is go that way. And this was another thing that stuck in the craw of Epstein. He said, oh, this is a violation of property rights. But the point is that if B was there first, even though the oil is under A's land, it doesn't matter. First come, first served. That's the homesteading of Locke and Rothbard and Hoppe. Whoever gets there first gets to the rights. This guy doesn't own the land below him. Now, how far below can you go below A's land? And the rule is you can go right up as close as you want as long as you don't cave him in. Right? Namely, as long as you don't interfere with his rights, because he has a house here first. Which means that the distance is different based upon the land. For example, in New Orleans, we're on a swamp. Right? So you have to go way, way below A. If you get too close, you'll cave them in. Whereas New York City is a solid rock. It's built on a solid rock, so you can get really right under the foundations of those houses, and you're not going to cave them in. And some people don't like it because this is variable. But it's only variable in terms of how many feet underneath can you go. It's not variable as to the principle. The principle is you can't interfere with the surface guy's rights. Okay, so what I'm trying to say, to sum up this objection, is that we can have private roads, and the holdout problem is not an insuperable problem because of various ways. First of all, it's illegitimate to own land in this configuration in the first place, and there are various ways to go around. And secondly, even if you posit that that's a legitimate way to homestead land, still we can go under him or over him. My son Matthew and I, he came to this when he was maybe 16 years old, and I tell you, for the next 2 or 3 years, we discussed nothing but this question. We discussed the question, well, suppose A knew he was going to do it, and he starts sinking poles down there so that B can't come through. You get it? And the answer to that was, see, what this guy has to do, if this is, say, 300 miles, he has to defend 300 miles. He has to put sticks down in 300 miles. All we have to do is get 50 feet wide. I mean, how wide is a road? 100 feet wide, 150 feet wide? So it's as if he is the defensive football team, and he's got 300-mile wide goal stand to defend against, and all we have to do is get one guy through. So this is a very convoluted thing. At the end of this, it's an interesting thing that occurred. He was now 17, and I'd finished writing it, but we two did it together. We discussed nothing but this. My wife was, amazed. Can't you talk about anything else? And then came the question, well, whose name do I put down there? Should I just say, well, I wrote it and thanks to him, or do I say, since this was it was a thing that came out of the ideas of both of us, and that's what I decided to do. I said, well, it's a co-authorship. And he said, but no one would believe that I, a 16-year-old kid, wrote this. And I said, well, is it true or not? He said, of course it's true. But I said, well, we're going with the truth. We don't care about what people will believe. So this is an article where Matthew and I got into a big debate with Gordon Tullock over this very question. So this is a series. I wrote an article, Gordon Tullock wrote an article, or rather Matthew and I wrote the article, Gordon Tullock criticized us, and then I wrote an article getting back at Gordon Tullock. It's amazing. The people I debate, Epstein, Tullock, they're supposedly free enterprises. I never get along with real commies. It's just these people that are posing as libertarians that really aren't libertarians. Okay. The next argument, or the next criticism, is the tic-tac-toe. What's going on with the tic-tac-toe? Better tic-tac-toe. The argument is, I own a house in the X, and now there are 4 roads around me, and they're going to prevent me from getting out. Right? They're going to say, we're not letting you out, or every time you come out, you have to pay $10,000. So you think, well, I better become a good pole vaulter, sort of, run up to the edge and then jump over, or get a helicopter. But no, there's a better answer than that. Right now, when you buy a house, what you do, in addition to buying a house, is you buy title insurance. And if you go through a lawyer, he's going to make you get title insurance. Namely, an insurance company that will verify that you have title to it and somebody else can't come along after you bought the house and say, hey, that house is really mine. If so, then the insurance company has to deal with it. You don't have to deal with it. Well, what I predict, if we had private roads, instead of having, or in addition to having title insurance, we would have a thing called access insurance. Before you ever bought that house, you would have discovered or contractually obligated these 4 road owners not to pull a fast one on you. And they would have every incentive not to do this because the value of their road is proportionate to the number of people on the road. And if they're going to mistreat people on the road who have houses along their road by pulling fast ones on them like that, well, then they're not going to have too many people on the road and the road won't be too valuable. It's sort of like, do pharmaceutical companies really want to poison their customers? I mean, poisoning your customers isn't good business. You have fewer customers. Well, if you're a road owner, do you really want to exploit your customers by charging them really wild-eyed prices or forbidding them access at all? No. you want to encourage people to go there, and if you want to encourage people to go there, you ought to be willing to sign a contract saying, look, I'm not going to charge you more than anyone else or something so that they can't do this. So much for that objection. Okay, next one is who determines the rules of the road? There will be chaos with different rules of the road. Now, an interesting thing occurred, I think it was Sweden. There are very few countries where you drive on the left side of the road. England now, and Sweden it used to be, but Sweden switched over. It took them like a whole year to do this. They would have ads in the papers, and the Swedish movie stars would be interviewed. What do they think of this? And, this would focus attention on the fact that in a year, or now in 6 months, or now in 3 months, the roads are going to change. Well, I admit that if you had such gigantic differences in roads, that one you drove on the left and now all of a sudden you have to drive on the right, that would be a problem. But we have evidence that road owners, or at least railroad owners, have a brain. Namely, they're not going to have one guy you drive on the right side of the road and the other guy you drive on the left side of the road. Do you know how standard gauge in railroads came about? It's 5'8". Before that, some railroads were, 6 feet or 7 feet, and others were narrow gauge, 3 feet. What they did is they got together, all the railroad companies, and they said, look, it's silly to have different gauges because every time you come to the end of one railroad and you go to the beginning of the other, you have to offload here and unload there. It's silly. Let's get the same standard gauge. And should it be 5'8" or 6 foot or 5 foot, it doesn't matter. But they came to that conclusion. We're now in the central time zone. East of us is the East Coast time zone, then there's the central, the Midwest, or whatever, mountain, and then Pacific. You know how that came about? Not by government. Again, by railroad companies. Private companies got together and said, look, it's getting confusing. We can't have timetables. Otherwise it'll, 3 in the morning will be sunlight. And so they came and got time zones. Well, any group that can have standard gauge and time zones can certainly have enough brain power so that they'll not have one guy driving on the right side and the other guy on the left side. But there might be other lesser heterogeneous rules than right side, left side. And my view is that we will have the optimal amount through free enterprise. Some people might say, well, we're going to have a speed limit on the right lane of 55, 70, and 85. Other people might have different speed limits. You see, the point I'm saying is that if you have too much heterogeneity, you'll have crashes because people are driving on the wrong side of the road. If you have zero heterogeneity, namely full homogeneity as we now have, then you can't learn how to save more people by experimenting. And what I'm saying is that I expect in the free enterprise system, we will have an optimal amount of heterogeneity such that we will minimize the number of deaths and also maximize the learning that goes on in order to make better rules. I mean, the rules of the road don't come from on high. They're not engraved in stone images. They certainly don't come from Washington, D.C. if they're going to be successful. They come from experience, from empirical experience, from competition. Look, what's the best color of tablecloth to have in a pizza parlor? Should you have red and white checkered ones? Should you have green ones, blue ones? Well, these things come from experience. They try different colors on the walls, music, not music, TV screens, not TV screens. There are all sorts of things that restaurants try in order to get us to come back. Well, if roads could do that, we'd be in a much better position than if roads can't do that as at present. Okay, the next one is traffic snarls or congestion. Now, at a zero price, demand is greater than supply. This is basic economics, and you have traffic congestion. What you need to cure this is a thing called peak load pricing. What you want is during the rush hours. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is here is time, and here is quantity of cars, and let's say this is 5 a.m., and this is 9 a.m., and this is 5 p.m., and 7 p.m., and we notice that the way people travel is like this. Right? You get a peak load from about 6 to 9, and then at night. So you get the morning rush hour and the evening rush hour. Yes? So what we want is higher prices to be charged here, high price, which would push this down, and a low price here, which would push this up, low price here, which would push that up. So we sort of flatten out the variances, the oscillations. And I expect that this is what would happen. In a free enterprise society, you have peak load pricing. We have peak load pricing all over the place. They charge more in the ski resort in the winter than in the summer. You can come to the ski resort in the summer. They have nice little houses and you can hike around, but it's much lower price. They charge more for dinner than lunch because more people want to go out to dinner than lunch. They charge, peak load pricing is a thing that they do everywhere. And peak load pricing has the benefit of ironing out the differences in demand. What does the bloody government do? What the bloody government does is it does the exact opposite. It does anti-peak load pricing. Namely, they exacerbate it. They make this higher and that lower. How do they do this? Well, they give you a monthly pass. And if you buy a monthly pass, you can get back and forth over the bridge or whatever it is a lot cheaper. Well, who buys the monthly pass? The guy who comes into town once or twice a week? No. The commuter. The very commuter who causes the peaks and the troughs. So what you're doing is making a lower price for this, so you're exacerbating it. So the government is exacerbating this, which leads a little bit to deaths. You know, they have these deaths by angry motorists. Well, I don't know if you've ever been on the LIE, the Long Island Expressway, which is the longest parking lot in the world. It's about 100 miles east to west, and you just sort of sit there. And somebody cuts you off, and you get out and shoot them. Well, it's all because of the government. If we had a private enterprise LIE, they would have higher prices during the peak, which would encourage, people, carpooling. Now what they have is this high occupancy lane, HOV, which is horrible. I was in California, and I had 2 or 3 people in the car, so we were zipping along, and then when we tried to get off, they wouldn't let us get off, because they resented the fact that we were going fast, so they sort of bunched up to keep us there, and that slowed down the HOV. Look, the HOV shouldn't be based on occupants, it should be based on money. If Bill Gates wants to drive along, even if he's by himself, he should pay enough so that he gets a lane where he can move. That's the way the market works. Whereas the way the government, socialist government works on roads, it's got all these, carpool or, go on a bus and sort of whining at you to do this. They don't allow the market to have incentives. Now, you might think, well, we can only do this with universal product codes, but no. You don't have, my view is that the market works no matter what the technology is. And we have an example from Singapore. What they do is they put a map. There's a map of Singapore. And if you want to get into the downtown business district, which is A, you get a certain color thing on your car, and you can go into the A area and you pay more. And if you want to go into the B area of the bullseye, in other words, they superimpose a bullseye over the city map, and they charge different amounts for going in different places, which is a very low-tech way of doing it. So you don't have to have universal product codes on the bottom of each car. This is another way of ensuring that you can have some sort of rationality. Singapore is almost a private country. It's the most economically free, or it in Hong Kong. So I hate to say something good about a government, but, you know, when they do something reasonable, what the heck. Okay, then, see, they call me Walter Moderate Block, because here I'm coming out in favor of the government. Okay, which road gets which green light time? So here are two roads, and they're having a fight over which one should have green light time. Well, one way is, instead of each of these people separately owning a road, you own a section of roads, and then you internalize that externality. The other way is you have a bidding process. How do we convert from now, I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to be able to get to all of my objections. Let me just give you one last one. We have Magnolia Street, Magnolia Avenue running out there. Suppose we wanted to privatize Magnolia Avenue. How would we do it so that we avoid this sort of a problem? One way to do it is to give each person half of the street abutting their land, which would mean that every time you went across somebody's land, you'd have to put in a penny. That's silly. A much better way is to make the Magnolia Street Corporation, and the Magnolia Street Corporation consists of the 10,000 people who own houses on Magnolia Street, plus other people who can demonstrate that they've used Magnolia Street. And now we have a Magnolia Street Corporation with 10,000 shares, and you can buy and sell the shares, and that's the corporation. Now, the last time I cheated people, I was a monopolistic withholder, and I only went 3/4 of an hour, but I am supposed to stop now at 12:30, right?
Yes.
Okay, so thanks for your attention.